Today we have a panel. The topic is Save Century 2, a grassroots effort. Today we have a panel of citizens who are passionate about the topic, and I'll read short bios. Celeste Bogart-Bichette, former regulatory bank examiner and fraud investigator, certified internal auditor, graduate of the University of Kansas School of Business, graduate of Wichita State University Master of Business Administration. In addition, she is a Paul Harris Fellow Rotarian and chairwoman of the Rainforest Room in Happy Hollow School. Celeste. Greg Kite, local attorney, president of Historic Preservation Alliance of Wichita and Sedgwick County. He has a law degree from Washburn University School of Law, active preservationist of local properties, McAdams Folds House, Ben's House, Dine Quick Diner, and Joyland Amusement Park artifacts. Greg, welcome.
Appreciate it.
Dean Bradley, architect, owner of Platt, Adams, and Bradley, past board member of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Historical Museum, and a native Wichitan. Recent notable projects include restoration of the Civil War Pavilion at Maple Grove Cemetery and ADA modifications to the Historic Museum and Heritage Square. Please join me in giving this illustrious panel a warm Pachyderm Club rock. I think Greg wants to come to the lectern and kick us off here. Welcome.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. I'll try to avoid getting in front of the camera. We've been adjusting the mic. Is that clear for everyone? Is that all right? Good. Again, my name is Greg Kite. I'm a local attorney and president of the Historic Preservation Alliance of Wichita and Sedgwick County. Let me begin by giving you all a tremendous thanks for allowing us to come. We're very passionate about Century 2. This gives us an opportunity to visit with you about a number of issues regarding Century 2, finances, historical importance, architectural significance, and a host of other things as well. At the conclusion of our panel visit, I think we're going to entertain some questions from you, the audience. We are actually interested in what you, the audience, the citizens of Wichita, want to say or want to ask. So anyway, let me begin by indicating specifically who we are and what we are not. Who we are. We are citizens in support of Century 2. We are your friends and neighbors. We are residents of Wichita, Sedgwick County, Kansas. We appreciate the city and its heritage. We have absolutely no financial interests in this effort. We believe Century 2 is both historically important and architecturally significant. We believe Century 2 is the single most iconic structure in Wichita. We believe Century should be more properly maintained, specifically the roof and landscaping, inasmuch as you may not be aware that maintenance has been deferred for the last 10 years. We would also like to see it renovated, updated, and upgraded, and incorporated into any future master plan. That's where we are. What we are not. We are not developers or contractors who have a financial interest in this project. We are not an international urban consulting group. We are not from Kansas City, Missouri. We are not being paid $700,000 to come up with the biggest project we can dream up to generate the largest contracts imaginable for the greatest cost to Wichita taxpayers that would necessitate the demolition of Century 2. That is what we are not.
Thank you for having us, and my name is Dean Bradley, and I'm talking about the fun stuff, the architecture and the design, the architects involved, and why it's valuable to us. I have 3 points: that it's a beautiful building, it's a valuable building, and it's fixable. I've got concerning the beauty, it's I know subjective, but it was designed by 2 architects. They were Kansas natives. They were young, 35 years of age about that time when they started the work, and but they both had been trained under Frank Lloyd Wright at his Taliesin Fellowship. So they had been together on the Corbin Education Center out of WSU, that if you're familiar with it, the north end of campus. And they were the architects hired by Frank Lloyd Wright in his fellowship to work on that building, and then during that process, they were given the contract for Century 2. So they bring to the design what we call organic architecture, and just a quick, I know we all are familiar with it, but the fact that it is of the place, it's not, we don't live in a forest, so this is reflecting the prairie, and you can see that in the wheat-colored walls, the long horizon lines that circle the building in the form of the balcony and the overhead roof line. Of course, the blue roof represents the sky of the prairie, and landscaping pockets were placed all around it to help also connect it to the ground. They are, so they did a great job, I think, of giving us a iconic structure, which leads me to the value of Century 2. Most cities would love to have a structure like Century 2 to brand their city with. And you can see it on t-shirts, obviously, and most literature includes Century 2. It's a valuable resource that way. But the other side of the coin is how it is as a resource. If we consider it as a gifted resource to us, it is a valuable piece of property that has been an investment in the past, and we're trying to keep it, that we can continue to use it and benefit from it. There's nothing greener, when we talk about green buildings, there's really nothing greener than reusing a building. So that's our challenge here. It's also flexible. You know that we've added, a few years after it was built, we added the theater organ to Century 2. It had a place to go. You know that it's flexible because oftentimes during River Festival we can move everybody inside, lawn chairs and wagons and everything. So it served a great purpose. And then it forms a triad of tourism because of the Allen House, Frank Lloyd Wright Allen House in College Hill, and the Corbin Education Center. We're really on the map, and along with Century 2, it gives people a real reason to come to Wichita just for the architecture of the Frank Lloyd Wright history. We also believe that most problems there are fixable. It's a matter of where we want to put our money. Asbestos is often brought up, and we would have to deal with asbestos if it was torn down. In fact, we have more problems with it entering the airstream, and so we can deal with that on a job-by-job basis. ADA problems with accessibility, that's fixable. Sound barriers, we can talk about that and improve all those things. The main thing is that it's basically, if we find that you absolutely can't get the theater that is needed within the envelope of Century 2, then maybe an addition nearby or attached to Century 2 more down by the river, allow some new materials introduced, but keep with the style of Century 2. So there's a lot of options, even if something new has to be developed. The performing hall could become just symphonic and not require the backstage. I think that's probably a big problem with not enough fly space above the stage and also to the sides and to the back. So basically, demolition is, in my thinking, old school. It's sort of an old technique to get rid of something, get a nice clean slate, sort of pretend you're out in the suburbs and building something new. I think it's better if we just use what we have, enhance it, be bold, and think big. And because it is beautiful, it's valuable, and it's fixable. And I'd also like to take demolition off the table and let the studies go forward and how to use Century 2 to keep the benefits that we see from it. Thank you.
Thank you all for letting us come here. It's an honor. Because of this project, I've come to meet some of you personally, and I am so impressed with the amount of work you all do to try to keep fiscal responsibility in the government. I am proud to be associated with a lot of you in this room, so hats off to you. We have t-shirt order forms that have our t-shirt because, like Dean and Greg were saying, we're grassroots. We don't have $700,000. We've had 2 public meetings. Bill Warren and Ann Garvey were at the last one. They're always at Mary Jane Teal. You saw that beautiful, deep, rich theater as we were going through the slides. So we've gotten donations and done fundraising, but do any of you know how I got started with this? I'll be real brief. I'm the financial person, but this is the fun side. I went to the boathouse on July 31st, saw in the paper the first public meeting. I was so excited. My dad's a former city council person with John Stevens, great man. Carl Bell, another great man. Gerald Bird, William Tarrant, great city council people who have the vision for the library, for Century 2, for the Cheney Water Preservation, for the Big Ditch. There are pictures up here on the table, Bill Tarrant, John Stevens, my dad. So I was really excited about the boathouse, and I took some historic artifacts of Century 2 to this meeting. And I go in there and I'm like, when do we get to talk about Century 2? And I was immediately told, we're not talking about Century 2. And I said, well, when are we going to have the public discussion? There is no public discussion. You get to play a game at the end with Post-it notes. So I wasn't really interested in that, and I went downstairs and there was a table not being used, and I spread out all these documents just to show people, if they were interested, how cool Century 2 was. You saw the structure, still broad beams, huge cement plaster foundation from Evie. All these neat movers and shakers of Wichita built that beautiful building. And all of a sudden this lady showed up and she's like, you have to leave. And I'm like, what? I'm sitting at a table. I'm not waving a protest sign or a bullhorn. I'm just sitting there showing people as they come in, if they're curious what Century 2 is all about. She said, this is a private meeting and you can't stay. And I'm like, I thought this was a public meeting that the taxpayers pay for. She's like, no, we rented the venue and you have to leave. You're hijacking the meeting. I was so stunned, but I wasn't going to cause a scene. I'm not that kind of person. I'm a fraud investigator. We don't make a lot of noise. We just do the work and we move on. So I packed up all my stuff and I left, but there happened to be a reporter there who's here today that wrote a little article about me being kicked out of the meeting. Greg Kite got a hold of me. John Todd got a hold of me, and people who had known my dad and couldn't believe I was treated that way reached out to me. Hence, we were born. So thank you, Tammy Bradley with Bradley and Bothner, because we're now a thorn in their side, I hope. And it's not about, this is a totally non-political, this is just about having a voice, and as a taxpayer, knowing how we're going to spend our money. Right? So I'm just going to tell you a little bit that my points are. First is, there is a private agenda here, and it was set up years ago. Here's what I found digging into financial reports. Populous architects and Riverfront Legacy members are pushing their own agenda. When they had the Mayor's Advisory Committee, there were no historians on that board, and there were no local architects like Dean Bradley. When I called one of the presidents, I'm not going to mention her, the Wichita Community Foundation, and said, do you know anything about Century 2? She's like, no. I said, do you understand the architectural significance of the Frank Lloyd Wright style? She's like, no. She didn't care. And I thought, they don't understand that in 1961, and I put the bond resolution up there, we voted on Century 2. When have we voted on any recent development? We should, because we're taxpayers. And one thing I discovered in looking through city council meetings, and believe me, I've read a lot, is that back in March 21st of 2017, I'm not gonna name names, but the city council passed a public emergency. Do you all know this? There was a public emergency, and the ordinance was passed to tack on East River development to 2016 star bonds. I didn't know we had a public emergency on the East River Bank, did you? So if you want to look, go to the March 21st, 2017 City Council meeting minutes, and you'll see that they declared a public emergency existed, requiring amendments to a previous ordinance that would funded the ballpark and that was now going to add the East River Bank development with star bonds. Do you all know what star bonds are? Okay, good. Just real briefly, they're from sales taxes that the state collects and the city collects, and our sales tax right now is about 7.5%. That's what the city and the state. And you know what sales tax is to be used for, really? Hospitals, prisons, schools, public transportation. But when you use star bonds, you divert that money over into what's supposed to be an economic generating vehicle for tourism. So there's requirements for that money where you're supposed to have 30% of your visitors come from out of state and 25% from outside a 100-mile radius. We've had a lot of star-bound projects that unfortunately, if you go to the Department of Commerce, which I've been in conversations with, we haven't even provided data on the star-bound projects that we're already paying for as taxpayers. And that, as an auditor and taxpayer, makes me angry. It does. And I know others of you know about this, but I'm new to the game. What I found out about some of our star-bound projects is K96 in Greenwich, 71 million in star bonds. The Commerce Department report says that the district has not provided up-to-date visitor information. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do these. I'm just saying if we're going to do them, we need to comply with what we said was going to happen. Water Walk Development, 13 million in star bonds and put us into a 99-year lease with how much revenue? 0. We did manage to rent the empty Gander Mountain building for how much a year? $1. $1 a year King of Freight's paying in rent, though they are also renting the parking garage, to be fair. So we get $6,001 a year on a $40 million investment. You can't even do the math on that rate of return. It doesn't exist. Now, on the other hand, we did say King of Freight will bring in 400 jobs paying $50,000 a year, and that would be great. So if it pays back those dividends, I'm all for it. But who's auditing that? Haven't heard anyone assigned. I'd be glad to volunteer and make sure that we get those jobs. Hyatt Hotel. Now that also almost ended in bankruptcy, but luckily we were helped on the project and we managed to sell it for $20 million. What you don't see, because you have to dig through the financial statements, on page 114 of 266 pages of financial statements for 2016, you'll see note 22, sale of Hyatt, and it shows a $12 million loss that hit the general fund. Do you hear about that when you hear the $20 million proceeds? No, it's a $12 million loss that came out of our general fund. So baseball stadium, that again may be a good deal, but it's $42 million in star bonds. And we didn't vote on it. I don't know why we're not voting on these projects. Cargill, yes, we got the headquarters and that's great. But we're building a new parking garage for Cargill for $10 million. And there's also a mess fund. You know, we settled with Cargill, I don't know if you know this, for $300,000 to clean up the, it's like a Superfund site from where they used to be. And we're gonna have to take care of it, and I bet it's gonna cost more than $300,000. How many of you know that the city of Wichita created a separate legal entity known as the Eclipse Investment Authority? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Nobody? I had one at our meeting at Mary Jane Till out of 200 people who had heard of that. The city of Wichita created a separate legal entity known as Eclipse Investment Authority to invest $10 million in a facility on Spirit's campus. And the city holds a mortgage on the facility. Now, I'm not saying that's not bad, but did we hear about it? Do we know about these things? That's what makes me mad, is I didn't hear about it. So luckily we've got some smart legislators up in the Topeka, and Christy Williams, she's a Republican from Augusta. You know her good. My kudos go out to her as I'm reading through star bonds. She wants scrutiny on star bonds to make sure incentives aren't being wasted on, and these are her quotes, pet projects that line the pockets of select developers. That's all I want to. Let me repeat that. Pet projects that line the pockets of select developers. That's all I want. Open, accountable government. Open fiscal dealings. And just, let's be honest and put it out there, right? So bless her heart, she and another Republican legislator passed House Bill 2223, which now requires cities to post the public star bond projects. So the city has until December to put those numbers out there, so I don't have to go digging to try to find our star bond. Okay, here's my third point though. Continued operation of Century 2 is the only cost-effective option. And I've got these books up here that the city and riverfront water development look at, but I don't think they've read them. Renovating Century 2, they like to say, is going to cost $235 million, but if you look at the report, that $235 million is like if I told my husband, we're going to remodel the kitchen, but I want you to tear out all the support walls and lift the roof, and then I want to line the kitchen in aluminum composite panels. So that's what's in this report. They want to line Century 2 with aluminum composite panels, which is $14 million. They want to put in another theater that seats 2,500 in the exhibition hall for $42 million. They want to add a 4,000 facility outside of the building just to have some called front loading space, not for trucks, just space, for another $40 million. And then remove the asbestos for another $12 million, which you can just cover, and it's less expensive than removing. So the interesting thing is, by the time you back out all these numbers from $235 million, which the Chung report uses and everyone tosses around as the cost of renovating Century 2, guess what it is really? $50 to $65 million. And I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but I had a conversation with the mayor, one of the city council members, and I said, this is not an accurate number. And he smiled and he said, yes. He knew it wasn't, but it's what you hear when you hear about renovating Century 2. So $50 million is affordable. But then what makes me mad is that, like Greg was saying, for the last 10 years, I had to file a Kansas Open Records Act request. I think Bob Weeks knows about filing these. And it took 2 attempts to get an answer to a very simple question. And I could have sued the city for not responding to me. But my question was, what's the deferred maintenance on Century 2? And I got an email back from Phil Pager at the Deputy Public Works Department and said, there's not any. I went to the city council attorneys and said, this is my KORA, and this is the email I got saying there's no deferred maintenance. I want to know when I'm going to get an answer to my question. Sharon DeGraff, bless her heart, she's an attorney there, said, we'll get you an answer. So I got a report from 2009 when Jim Bishop was there, and he rated the building for different things. The roof was rated poor, not excellent, good, or fair, poor. This is 2009. It was also rated because there was no fire alarm system, no safety alarms in case there was a fire. And do you know what? I had a meeting with Robert Layton and said, where are we at now? And I got a September report that showed we still have no fire alarm systems, we still have not fixed the roof. And the notes in this maintenance report from just 2 months ago now, had John D's name on it. Well, that's, you know who John D is? D'Angelo. He doesn't even work for the city anymore. This problem just kept rolling forward and forward and forward with his name on it, that the roof leaked, and nobody fixed it. Now, if this had been my house in my neighborhood and I had not fixed the roof, and I had not painted it, and I had not mowed the yard, my neighbors would have been upset. So I told Robert Layton, I said, that you didn't come to the taxpayers and say, we're sitting on repairs because it doesn't make economic sense for us to fix it. I want to know that. Because if we can't take care of our current buildings, what the heck are we doing building more? It doesn't make sense. And like I said, I'm an auditor, but all I want really is common sense. And I want an open and transparent government. And the only point I'll end with is that, you know, the Kansas statutes put a limit on our debt, right? Some of you might know that. One of our city council members didn't even know that, but the Kansas statutes limit the amount of our debt. And we have 2 big projects coming up. We have a water plant that's $500 million, and the East Riverbank development, the Riverfront Legacy, they do their performing arts, their exhibition, demolition, and deconstruct, everything they want to do is another $500 million. We're getting strapped with STAR bonds, with general obligation bonds, and I'll tell you how we're paying for this, even if we don't get to vote on it. Our sales tax is one way, and we're losing local business because people go online, and I don't blame them. It's one way to get out of the 7.5% sales tax. And your property tax, now granted, mill levies haven't gone up, but what's happened to our assessed value in Wichita? It's gone up 5.7 last year and 4% the year before. I said I'd bore you, I'm a numbers person, but that's how you make it up. Even though you're saying your mill levy hasn't changed, great. But my assessed value, even in opportunity zones, has gone up. So this is how they get property tax revenue. We have a lot of TIF districts. We have a lot of groundwater contamination. We've got a lot of sites that need cleanup. And I'm just telling you, we're getting strapped. And that's what concerns me, is I want the city to slow down and think about what they're doing. One last closing comment. I care so much about Century 2 and the vision of the people at that time and how they worked together. Even though they didn't agree, they would vote against each other if they had to. John Stevens frequently voted against my dad, but my dad was a pallbearer at his funeral because they really respected each other for having a voice and talking. So one thing I want to end with is that we're working hard, not just to tell you it wouldn't cost that much, but we've already filed the first step of Historic National Registry, and we passed it. It's called a PSIQ, and it came back from the state of Kansas and said, yep, this qualifies. We did a lot of work, but I'm simplifying it. And also, the library qualifies. I'm not going after the library. We have a limited amount of time, but we are going to file for National Historic status for Century 2. And then you get tax credits, which you can sell, and you get help with renovation. And we have an interested person, Bill Warren, would love to go in there and put in a theater, restaurant, shops. One of these studies actually talks about everything you could do with that building. Let's not tear it down. It's steel rods, it's solid concrete. Those guys built that building to last, and I think it's worth saving. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, well,
Here, I'll let you. Sorry. Yeah, this is really neat.
I was gonna say, the
John
movie version
Hickman,
then.
do you all know who John Hickman was? He was the first architect. He ended up dying, unfortunately. And then Roy Barinhorst took over. So I've been talking to his daughter, Ellen Hickman, and her son, who's also an architect.
Hi there. I'm Ellen Hickman, and I've been weighing in as someone who was around during the design of the building, first called the Civic and Cultural Center, in the early 60s. I visited the site over the years, and I marveled at the realization of the design. Living in Austin has involved experiencing the loss of some historic buildings and the retention of others. The latter group remaining is either repurposed structures of cultural value to the town or iconic design pieces recognized for their value by longtime and new residents. The demolition of iconic designs in favor of something newer and supposedly more modern has been regretted in locations around the world. And once done, cannot be undone. I will follow the progress of this endeavor and certainly have these. I visited the site over the years and I marveled at the realization of the design. Living in Austin has involved experiencing the loss of some historic buildings and the retention of others. The latter group remaining is either repurposed structures of cultural or recognized for their value by longtime residents. The demolition of iconic designs in favor of something newer and supposedly more modern in locations around the world. And once done, cannot be undone. I will follow the progress of this endeavor and certainly have an interest in my photographs comprising a history of the future rather than regret over an opportunity lost.
Hello, I'm Shannon McVeigh, and the architect who designed Century 2 with my grandfather. You'll have to forgive me for probably mispronouncing the name of the man who wrote the article that I read in reference to this story, Tim McCurdy. Anyway, it was very well written about the current state of affairs at Century 2. And you'll have to forgive me as I'm reading the notes, but it strikes me as emblematic of many of the problems that we have in our society when I read about this building. We have a fascination nowadays with all things new and shiny, while the most valuable cornerstones of our personal and public lives crumble in a state of neglect. When I read that the tower hasn't been lit as my grandfather intended, not for a month, but for a decade, and the flower beds have descended into a state of disrepair, devoid of plants and beauty, it is disheartening for me to hear. This was my grandfather's gift to the city of Wichita and was designed to serve the people for generations, a task it was well capable of doing if it was maintained and respected in the manner which it was intended. Anything worth having is worth maintaining. And if I were a taxpayer in the city of Wichita, I would be hesitant to give my support and tax money to an authority that has not shown a level of capability to maintain the buildings it already has, instead sacrificing their heritage for the quick fixes of developer dollars and big promises. I work as an urban designer and a land planner for a development company, so I happen to know whereof I speak at this moment. I am also aware of the heady nature of development promises and the political machinations that bring these deals to the table. I also know what can happen when these deals fail to meet the expectations, and the problems that arise from them outlast the political careers of the people that convinced the public that it was in their best interest to bring cost and risk to bear that was never needed in the first place, and really only benefits people who turn out to be pretty hard to find when the time comes for them to finish what they started. So, I'll close with this. My daughter gets a hard pass from me when she asks for new toys, and the ones she got a week ago are bleaching in this Texas summer sun, neglected and forgotten before their time. So, if John Hickman's 8-year-old great-granddaughter has to follow the rule of appreciating what she has before she gets new things, it's only fair that the city fathers and mothers of Wichita should be held to the same standards.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll start the Q&A over here. Now, our usual process is we work with our members and we ask them to just ask questions, but you heard the invitation. So if you do have a brief statement, that's also acceptable, right? Now, are you guys gonna walk up to the podium or do you want me to bring the mic to you
We'll walk up
when it's time to answer?
Yep.
Okay, we'll do it that way, and the first question starts right here.
Thank you. Actually, my question is for you. I apologize, I couldn't remember your name. But,
Celeste.
okay. First off, has there been any investigation in or pricing where you mentioned about the old library and you mentioned about some of the remodels? Any thoughts of putting a walkway between Century 2 and the old library and using that as the expansion for any additional space?
I think anything they come up with, including, I know a bridge has already been drawn from the ballpark across to the Hyatt Hotel, is already in the River Legacy plans if you look at them. So I think that's a neat idea. I just want to see everything put on paper and priced, and then consider, you know, how much does that cost and what do they think it will really add. So it's a great idea. I just want to see the pricing and see the concept.
Kind of an interesting point that you bring up, and that is this. Bill Warren addressed that a little bit at our last meeting, and he said, he said something about the old library. He said, we got some exaggerated figures on the cost to restore the old library and bring it up to speed and make it more accountable or more compatible with new up-to-date technologies and those kinds of things. And he said what the city does is they give expanded or exaggerated values for restoration or remodeling to justify a new library. Not to detract from the new library, but how much did we need the new library? And was the reason and the justification, inflated and exaggerated values to remodel and repurpose the old library? I think that's an interesting proposition that Bill Warren brought up. Yeah.
Right here.
Okay, there's been criticism that the current space in there doesn't have a big enough space for some venues in there. Without raising that roof, would it be safe to take out one pillar and to get that larger space, without raising the roof? Hopefully that was a question.
We're gonna handle that dually. Go ahead.
Okay.
All right, there's a study up here that you're free to look at, and it's the Arab San Francisco group that did a study, and they talk about that, taking out the center supports. But they felt like there was actually space you could use and repurpose. Like if you do, we're not trying to solve everything, but if you do make Bob Brown bigger on the, or build a smaller new performing arts, that's a gym in the Watermark area, but scaled it back so it wasn't a $500,000 proposition. Then you could, since you've moved out the symphony and moved out, let's say, Wichita Music Theater, you could put other things in that area. Then you could fill up exhibition hall with either smaller exhibitions like car shows, or you could put a theater in there for smaller groups, restaurants, grocery store. And they mention all of that in this study. I don't know why we haven't talked about it, but it's all in this, and feel free to peruse it.
Let me just take on from that. We have actually a vision for this. We have a three-part vision, three-phase vision, including Century 2. With respect to Century 2, Phase 1 is, of course, to be more properly maintained. As we indicated, maintenance has been deferred for the last 10 years. It should be renovated, updated, and upgraded, and repurposed for different emphasis. Different emphasis being symphony orchestra and music theater. We would propose that enlarging the stage of the concert hall. Dean Bradley mentioned very briefly some of the problems that detractors have raised, and I'd like to go through an entire laundry list and address those. These are solvable problems. Lack of sound isolation, solvable. Inefficient loading docks and capabilities, solvable. Insufficient production areas, solvable. Substandard equipment, solvable. Inability to integrate technology into productions, solvable. Makeshift shops for costume design and set building, solvable. Phase 2 in our vision of how this should go down addresses the Bob Brown Expo Hall. And really, if you look at it realistically, the Bob Brown Expo Hall, at least in our humble opinion, is nothing more than a glorified Costco or Sam's warehouse. It is neither historically important or architecturally significant. We would propose to enlarge it in its current form to the east, or demolish and build new, both taller and larger. Conventioneers do appreciate a square grid system. Even the mayor has been so bold as to agree with that. We would agree with it also. Probably easier and better to be on a square grid system, so why not enlarge and enhance the Bob Brown Expo Hall? That is an easy approach. Again, it's not historically important or architecturally significant, unlike Century 2. Finally, Dean Bradley has always talked about the trophy theater, and we're not opposed to that. We really aren't. A trophy theater that would accommodate the very best Broadway shows. The Broadway shows that Century 2 can't handle right now are probably 5 to 7% of the total number of Broadway shows. So, could it be constructed? Absolutely. To the west of and connected to Century 2. It would have a larger stage and stage house. It would have larger wings for sets, more restrooms and backstage accommodations, structurally more capable of suspending fixtures from the ceiling, such as the chandelier from Phantom of the Opera, more efficient loading docks and capabilities, and it would only need to be approximately 1/3 the size of Century 2 with seating of approximately 2,200. So, yes, we're in favor of a new, what we would call a trophy theater that would accommodate all, and I mean all, Broadway shows. Not to say that Century 2 can't still handle that. It can, other than those 5 to 7% that require additional accommodations. The important thing, and Celeste usually mentions this, and so I'm going to jump on it and say, the one thing about performing arts is we can't let Century 2 go dark. If Century 2 goes dark, we lose performing arts. Century 2 is the key to this. With Century 2, we can continue with performing arts, and if the decision is made to make this additional trophy theater, so be it. We'll still be up and running. But if we let performing arts go dark, then we do have a problem.
Back here, next question.
I'm going to make a statement, and then at the end a question. Little history, turn of the century back in 2000, Starbond Financing was introduced by a gentleman that owned the rights to The Wizard of Oz in LA. He went to Warner Brothers, I think. And he went to the state legislature. They were going to build a whole theme park built around The Wizard of Oz in Kansas City, where the racetrack is there now. That did not happen. And so I talked to him, went to LA. We talked a short time about actually doing something here and moving it from Kansas City to here. Well, fast forward 20 years, and Starbonds have been used for a whole bunch of things. So the proposal that a group of us are making is actually do something down there that would bring people off of I-35, because there's thousands of people travel up and down I-35, and they will not stop to go over a little pedestrian bridge, but they would stop to go over and over the Rainbow Bridge. That was iconic, and even though it's not just The Wizard of Oz, it's the #1 selling song of all time. Every child would want to go over the rainbow. Daddy, Daddy, can we stop and go over the rainbow? I think it could do more to bring people into downtown Wichita than any other thing. In that whole area, the problem is getting people down there. So anything that's done with Century 2, I'd like to propose something as radical and as cool as an over the rainbow bridge. And it's on Facebook, a lot of people are liking it, a lot of people love it. I just think we ought to talk about the finances, how much money could be brought in if you actually made something that people would come to. In addition to stimulating convention and tourism business, and I like your whole idea about adding to the Bob Brown and leaving Century 2 alone. It could therefore have all kinds of restaurants and gift shops and all kinds of things in there if you actually had a tourist attraction. And something, this Rainbow Bridge would be LED, so it would be lit up at night. If the ball, somebody hit a home run, the ball could go over it, it could say home run. It could say welcome to Wichita. It'd be a really cool thing that was, if it was done properly, could really identify the city as a place where people would come and want to visit. The question is, Celeste, with your background, why don't you get involved with the city in helping, really dig into the numbers? Would they actually listen to somebody who has your background and come in and advise them openly on how to make this happen in a cost-efficient way?
Thank you for raising the question. Let me answer that in two parts. I've tried 3 times to work with Riverfront Legacy. Tammy Bradley told me to leave. And then I actually went to one of their open walking tours, and Susie Santos tried to talk to her, and she cut me off and ran off. So she and I actually have a phone conversation scheduled for next Monday, briefly on the phone. So I tried. I also left a voicemail message on their phone number, and nobody called me back. But to the city, I have gotten FaceTime with Robert Layton. We sat down and talked, and he did provide some information. I appreciate that. The mayor and one of the council members sat down and talked with me as well. And the mayor did admit 235 million was an inflated number. That was nice of him, generous on his part. And I am meeting with Mark Manning, who's the treasurer, next week, because I had a lot of questions and no one could answer them. I'm not going to mention who, but when I had this meeting with the mayor and the city council, I said, do you realize we have a legal debt limit? And they didn't know this. And so I said, every city council member that gets elected needs to know our finances, what we're limited to, and how the numbers work. And they didn't even know in the financial report. I brought a copy. I bring this huge briefcase of everything. So I pulled it open, our 2020-21 financial statements, and I showed this person, yeah, it's right here. It's one of the footnotes to our financial statements. We're limited to 1 billion. So I have tried to talk to them, but just to ask general questions, like how much debt margin we have. I knew it's 800 million. They look at me with stares and say, you need to talk to Mark Manning. Well, Mark Manning now wants a list of my questions so he can be prepared to answer them. So I'm trying to work with them. I think they're a little scared of me because they can't answer my questions. And I'm not doing that to be mean. Really, I'm not. I'm not a mean person. But I am an accountant, and numbers don't scare me. And I've done fraud investigations where I've been lied to, I've been intimidated, and I've had a man try to bribe me, and he's pretty wealthy. So I'm pretty persistent and will continue to ask questions. I'm trying.
Okay, we have another question right back here.
This would be for Celeste. It's a fairly simple question. I'm a numbers person also. The answer I get many times, if they're doing something illegal or they're breaking state law or they're doing something that they're not supposed to do, the answer is, well, sue us. Have you gotten that response?
Ooh, no, I haven't gotten that one yet, because, when I didn't get my KORA request back, I went straight across the hall from Jamie, poor city clerk, to the city council, and I demanded to see an attorney because I was mad. And I guess because I've provided evidence for the FBI, I've been a bank examiner, and I actually started here at Fourth National Bank as an auditor. I think they know that I'm not someone who's swayed easily. So I haven't run into that yet. What did you say back?
Well,
That's a tough situation.
yeah, it was the worst of it was they had published as required 10-day notice on some action they would take.
Right, like an emergency ordinance amendment for the year before?
No, it was something,
Okay.
something legitimate that didn't have to be posted.
Right, legally.
And at the council meeting, they changed some of the things. Instead of like 2%, it was going to be 1.5%. And so I went down and I said, now, I posted this, but now you want to do that. Aren't you required to post it if you're going to change it? The city council didn't know. The city attorney didn't know.
Yeah, I know, it's
And
scary.
he said that he'd have someone on the staff check. And so they tabled it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the meeting, the attorney said, well, yeah, we do have to repost it if we're going to change it.
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it?
The city attorney and the council, we just do what we want.
I know, it's really scary. That's why I think you really, and you've had open debates here, which is great, from the mayor and the mayor candidates. We have to continue to ask them questions. And I came out of nowhere, and they are now, I don't know, they're scared of me. I don't know that I look scary, but they're definitely scared of me. So I think what we have to do, especially with an election around the corner, is email your council person, email the mayor, the Kansas legislators, email them. But I think if we raise our voices together, like Bob Weeks, I saw him making a plea in front of city council for KORA requests to be respected by these quasi-private, like Go Wichita, which is one that we pay for them, and they're like, this is our event, the snottiness of the people in these groups. And Bob, I saw you being turned down. So I know we're all trying. I'm so respectful of what Voice of Liberty, John Todd, I'm sure there's more of you here, so respectful of what's become a closed process. It wasn't this way when we started. And that's, back in the day when they were on council, they didn't elect a mayor, they took turns for a year. So you didn't get a concentration of power. I think now we've got this concentration of power, and people think they're unaccountable. And by golly, it's our taxes, right? So if you want to join up with us in any way, so far I still have a meeting next week with Mark Manning. We'll see if that changes after today. And I'm going to submit him a list of questions. And what's really interesting, again, I'm not going to mention names because I'm keeping this bipartisan. There's a city council person who now wants to attend that meeting because I sent them all an email and said, you better know there's a Kansas statute. You better read your own financial reports. It's on page blah, blah, blah of this 260. I found it for him. And all of a sudden now the city council person wants to attend this meeting I'm going to have with the treasurer. And that's great. I'm glad that this person wants to learn. I'm not hiding anything. I will share whatever I have with any of you, anytime. And that's what I want our representatives to do.
over here.
I think it's been maybe a year ago when the mayor did speak to us here, and he talked about, the question came up about the closed library. And he said that the interest was being shown to moving the African American, or the African Museum over to that, and also that Channel 8 also was interested in having their studio there.
Absolutely.
And it's a positive thing to have the museum come over, because that, with our Sedgwick County City Museum across the street, it just brings people to one place.
Right.
I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah.
And you didn't mention that. I just wonder if that's gotten cold or something.
I bet it's in that study, because they had a whole list of things that they thought Century 2 could be used for, the Arab study, and I bet museums, in fact, the aviation museums talked about it, and I think that's a marvelous idea. Marvelous idea.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Keep the building and make it.
Repurpose it.
I know that it has the heating, air conditioning system is all tied into.
To the library.
Yeah, to the library.
Yeah,
And
you're
so
smart,
there's
you know
some
that,
expense
yeah.
to get it separated.
Yeah.
The other thing, talking to Jim Greer, who was a superintendent when they built.
Yes.
The Century 2.
I've spoken with him too, yeah.
Yeah, he said it's expensive, but they're solving that, getting the trucks down there is just a matter of doing it.
Right.
It's possible. And so I think there's, you mentioned that a little bit about being repurposed, and I agree wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Thank you for your support. Really appreciate it. Because this is from grassroots, which means a budget of 0. So you have on your table should be t-shirt order forms. I know you're not the kind of group that needs a $20 t-shirt. But that's actually how we've raised money. We have had some donations too from some wonderful people that have helped us, because we don't get city employees helping us. We rent the projector, I bring my laptop, we rent Mary Jane Till, Greg has to get insurance on it. We don't get anything free, nothing free. So if you're interested in these wonderful t-shirts, or for your kids or whatever, take an order form, a form home, and I'll mail them to you. So you just, their address and who you write the check to, Historic Preservation Alliance, put it in the mail, and I pick up the mail, and I'll send you a t-shirt in the form, in the size you're wanting, okay? Facebook? Oh, Facebook, thank you so much. So Bill Warren has a website called Save Century 2, www.savecentury2, that's Bill Warren's site. And please don't tell me he needs to update city council people. I know it, but he's got it copyrighted, so I can't change it for him. But I have a Facebook page called Save Century 2, where I've posted current council members. And I have the order form there, thank you so much. I have the tape of our last presentation in Century 2, which we had about 200 people as well attended. It went really well. You'll know how to contact, you can post things, you'll see pictures. So Facebook, you'll see Save Century 2. That's our logo.
Does your group support the having a vote, yes or no?
Absolutely. Did you see I put up the resolution, mayor's resolution from 1961? When are we going to vote? Thanks, John. Let's vote on how we spend our money.
Let's give a big round of applause to Dean Bradley, Greg Kite, Before I let you all go, I have 2 points that I want to make real quickly here, because we had a mention about former mayor John Stevens. You may know, and I think quite a few people here do, I'm not sure if the folks up here do, our president emeritus of this organization, John Stevens, is the son of that mayor, John Stevens. Yeah. And so we're particularly proud of that. And if you really want to get more on this story, the second meeting is posted online from the Century 2. Bill Warren and Ann Garvey's comments are remarkable. The speakers who are here also spoke. They did a great job there too. I recommend it highly. It's online. Check it out. Thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend. Bye.